Hi, very warm welcome to Dusty Shelf Collectibles. Well, today I'm going to try something a little bit different, a sort of documentary style video. I've not really done one of these before, so we'll see how it goes. But I was recently reading in the Steam Railway magazine all the articles in here and just literally trying to find some good news, and there just doesn't seem to be any. I was reading about the Severn Valley Railway's pig, its last steaming, and the final load of coal coming from, let me get this right, I'm just reading it because off my crib sheet here, Frosty Fran mine in Merthyr Tydfil. So that's the last of the UK coal coming out of the coal mine there. And I stumbled across this article in the magazine. Bad news again, if I can find it. I came across this article: 6 locos being rehomed from the Railway Museum at Penrhyn Castle in Wales. So I thought I'd do a video after reading the reason why the collection's no more. So I quote: "We have been reviewing the way we display our collections as we look how history is presented at Penrhyn Castle, and we will be rehoming some of the locomotives that are unconnected to the Penrhyn Castle story." The first comment that came to mind was these locos have been in the museum for 40, maybe 60 years. So how old is the castle? And I pondered the possible fact that these locos may share part of the castle's history for a large proportion of its existence. So therefore, how can you claim the locomotives are not connected when they've been there so long? Let's first set the scene. Penrhyn Castle is set on the north coast of Wales, overlooking the Menai Straits. The original building was home to the Penrhyn family, who owned Jamaican sugar plantations and moved back to the United Kingdom in 1730. They effectively became absentee landlords and still made their money from the Jamaican estates, and obviously hundreds of enslaved African people working for them. Now, the connection to slavery should not be overlooked, and there's a lot of information on the National Trust's website should you wish to read more. But I'm going to keep this focus onto the Railway Museum and not go too deep into the history there. Although the family wealth was initially made overseas, as the Industrial Revolution gathered pace, demand for slate surged. A few powerful and wealthy landowners, such as the First Lord of Penrhyn, developed small local quarries into global industries. And so the Penrhyn family moved into the business of quarrying slate. As cities around the world grew, the slate from the quarries in Gwynedd was widely used on roofs, on all kinds of buildings, places of worship, factories, public buildings, you name it, it was all across the world. The riches poured in. The wealth continued to around 1900, when pay and conditions came to a forefront at the slate mines. The unions became stronger, and it led eventually to the Great Strike. In 1949, after the death of the 4th Lord of Penrhyn, the land and title separated. The title went to Frank Douglas Pennant, who became the 5th Lord of Penrhyn, and the land went to the 4th Lord's niece, Lady Janet Harper. 2 years later, Penrhyn Castle came under the care of the National Trust and has been there ever since. The current castle building was built by the famous architect Thomas Hopper in a neo-Norman style. He oversaw all aspects of the castles, everything from the carpet to the furniture, even down to the carved animals and patterns in the stonework. I've been there a couple of times, and it truly is a splendid building. It really is a magnificent stately home, and I really do recommend a visit just to the building itself. So skipping forward to 1840, when the current castle building was completed, that makes the castle 184 years old. So reiterating my point that the Railway Museum has been around 60-ish years, roughly a third of the history of Penrhyn Castle, I would suggest again, by their very longevity at the site, the locos are indeed part of the history of Penrhyn. The museum is, or depending on the date I record this, was home to 9 locomotives. So we've got Fire Queen, Haydock, Charles, Kettering Furnaces No. 3, Beckton Locomotive No. 1, Hawarden, Vesta, and Hugh Napier, which is based at the Fenstiniol Railway and visits from time to time. And finally, Watkin, which is now on display at the Welsh Highland Railway station in Carnarvon. Also based at Penrhyn was some coaches and other memorabilia. So let's first deal with the locomotives that are staying put. The castle's website states, the castle team are reimagining the display space that houses the current collection to share experiences and stories of the Penrhyn industrial heritage. With the development of the Penrhyn Railway in 1798, the Welsh slate industry became a global scale operation. The new display will focus on items from the castle's collection that have not been or rarely seen before. 2 of the locomotives and a number of coaches connected with the railway will remain. Works number 283 Charles will take centre stage in the new exhibition. It was built by the Hunslet Engine Company in 1882 and is an additional 1 foot 3¼ inch narrow gauge loco. If it looks familiar to you, this is because it's the younger brother of Blanche and Linda that can be found on the Penrhyn Railway, two of my favourite engines, and if you watch my train exhibition videos you'll note how many times I've pointed them out on the backman stand. Charles was referred to as a mainline engine at the Penrhyn Quarry and worked until the late 1950s. The loco was then stored at Port Penrhyn from about 1958, and with a deteriorated boiler it was then placed on permanent loan to the National Trust about the time when the museum collection was formed. The picture you see here was taken in the mid-1980s, and yes, that is a teenage me sitting next to the loco. The other loco remaining at the castle, I think, is Hugh Napier, works number 855, again a traditional narrow gauge loco. I say I think because it's not totally clear where the loco resides. It's implied the loco will be part of the new exhibition, but the National Trust website says it's located at the Penrhyn Railway and visits the castle on special occasions. This saddle tank was also built by the Hunslet Engine Company in Leeds in 1904. It spent its entire life at the Penrhyn Quarry. The loco appears to have had two periods of restoration, one in the 1970s by a team of enthusiasts and again in 2012 by the Penrhyn Railway. There's a fantastic web page about the restoration in the 1970s, and I'll put a link in the description if you want to read more. And finally, if you were wondering, Hugh Napier was the 4th Baron of Penrhyn. The rolling stock remaining on display are the Penrhyn Quarryman's open coach that ran on the main line of the quarry and belonged to the quarryman's train. This was a train financed by the men of the quarry to transport them to the quarry and back again. The train with the coach made its final journey in February 1953 and then was loaned to the National Trust in 1963. The other key stock to remain at the museum is the Penrhyn Saloon coach, which will be displayed with Charles. This coach was built around 1892 and was used by Lord Penrhyn for journeys to and from the quarry. So what will happen to the other locos? Well, they're being rehomed, so let's go through them one by one. Firstly, Fire Queen, described as the highest profile and most important engine to be rehomed. She was built in 1848 by H. Horlock & Co., who are traditional marine engineers by trade, and is a 4-foot gauge loco. The design was based on an 1847 patent from Thomas Crampton, where the wheels and cylinders are connected directly to the boiler, and therefore there are no frames on the loco. The engine spent its working life on the Penrhyn Railway at another slate mine, the Denoric Quarry. The railway opened in 1840 with traction provided by horses. Fire Queen was the first of 2 engines to be used on the Penrhyn Railway, and went into service just after it opened in 1849. The second being Ginny Lind, which met her fate at the scrapyard. Fire Queen continued on the railway until about 1880 and was retired at the same time as the ill-fated sister loco. The Penrhyn Railway is now one of North Wales' most scenic narrow gauge railways, and yes, the tracks are no longer 4-foot gauge. The line reopened in 1971 and the tracks were relaid as a standard 1-foot 10 3/4 inch narrow gauge. The route of the line follows the shoreline of the Penrhyn Lake for most of the 5-mile journey and is now more commonly referred to as the Llanberis Lake Railway. It's a fantastic visitor site which I really recommend visiting. And also adjacent to the main Llanberis railway station is the National Slate Museum, an absolutely fascinating place bringing the history of slate quarrying to life. I've been fortunate to go there many times, and for me it's always the highlight is the shaft-driven workshop. It's got this very distinctive sound that's hard to describe, as the bearings, they sort of, as they're rotating in the shaft you get those squeaks and rumbles, and yeah, it's very, very distinctive. However, if you follow the workshops towards the back of the museum, you come across the power source, and that's a 50-foot water wheel, which really has to be seen to be believed. And the reason for mentioning the Slate Museum is that Fire Queen will eventually return to its original shed within the workshops of the Denoric Quarry, and obviously to the museum. Yes, I'm really pleased that this particular loco is going to remain in North Wales, and it's going home. With such an active museum and railway, I cannot wait to see Fire Queen out in the yard on a nice summer's day. The next loco, Kettering Furnaces No. 3, will be heading to Ireland to be rehomed. The loco was built by Black Hawthorne & Co. in 1885 and carries the work number 859 with a 3-foot gauge. Kettering Furnaces No. 3 spent its working life on the Kettering Ironstone narrow gauge railway that served the ironstone quarries around Kettering. The quarries originally opened in 1876, with the railway following 3 years later in 1879. There were 6 locos in total, sequentially named Kettering Furnaces 2, 3, 4, then 6, 7 and 8, the earliest being built in 1879 and the last in 1906. I can't find a reference anywhere to Kettering Furnaces number 1 or Kettering Furnaces number 5, so please leave a comment if you know more. I assume the first 3, being manufactured by Black Hawthorn and the latter 3 by Manning Wardle, may be the reason for the break in sequence. Out of the 6, only 2 remain, number 3 at Penrhyn and number 7 saved for preservation by the Welland Valley Vintage Traction Club. Yeah, bit of a mouthful. So why Ireland? Well, quite excitingly, the 1885 engine is to be restored to operational condition and will work trains on the 3-foot gauge Waterford and Sow Valley Railway. Not a railway I've visited before, so quite looking forward to getting to visit that at some point, and especially as I have family in the area. Watkin is a 3-foot gauge loco built by De Winton with a vertical boiler. It was built in 1893, and I'm going to try and pronounce this right, Penrhyn Granite Quarry, apologies if I've got that wrong, where it worked until 1944. It was purchased for preservation in 1966 and loaned to the National Trust for display at Penrhyn Castle. This loco has already been rehomed, as in 2019 it was removed from Penrhyn Castle and taken to the new Welsh Highland station in Carnarvon, where it's now on display in the entrance hall. The next loco is Haydock, built in 1879 by Robert Stevenson. This is the largest loco at the Penrhyn Museum and has works number 2309. With a standard gauge of 4 foot 8.5, the loco had its longest service with Richard Evans & Co., later known as the National Coal Board. This was at the Haydock Foundry near St Helens, hauling coal wagons from the company collieries and the Manchester Ship Canal. Haydock arrived at the museum in 1966 and has been on display inside and outside the building. And its new home? Well, it'll need to go on a boat to get there, but not too far, as the new home will be on the standard gauge Isle of Wight Railway. So let's hope it steams again someday, running along their 10 miles of track. Moving on to the next loco, we have Hawarden, another standard gauge loco built in 1899 by Hubwell Clark. The loco was built for the Globe Ironworks at Stalybridge and carries works number 526. I struggled to find much information about the loco, others to say do not confuse it with 2636, the Bagnall of the same name. Hawarden is another loco that's going home, returned to the city of its birth, Leeds, as the engine heads to the Milton Railway, which I read is the oldest continuing operating railway, having first opened in 1758. Hawarden is destined for static display, but looking at the railway it does appear to have a fascinating history and a great deal of stock, so I'm definitely going to make a visit one day and make a dedicated video. So works number 1223 Vesta is the 4th of 5 standard gauge locos at Penrhyn, also built by Hubwell Clark, but a little later than Hawarden in 1916. So this is going to get a little bit confusing because Vesta was built for the Hawarden Bridge Steelworks, obviously sharing the name with the Hawarden loco, and then spent most of its working life operating on the Shotton Steelworks in North Wales. The loco was taken into preservation by the Industrial Locomotive Society and was eventually gifted to the National Trust for display at Shrubber Hall before joining the Penrhyn collection. Vesta's new home will initially be the Bury Transport Museum for the first 3 years, and then after this it will move to the East Lancashire Railway and they will take over ownership of the loco. The East Lancashire Railway runs for 12.5 miles between Heywood and Greater Manchester and Rawtenstall in Lancashire, but it's not actually clear if the intention is to see Vesta in steam in the future. And finally to the last loco and 5th standard gauge loco, Beckton Gasworks No. 1. Built by Neilson and Company of Glasgow in 1870 and carried works number 1561. No. 1 spent its entire working life at Beckton Gasworks in London. The gasworks at Beckton opened in 1870 and was owned at the time by the Gaslight and Coke Company, with the name Beckton being given to the plant and the surrounding area of London to honour the company's governor, Simon Adams Beck. Beckton eventually became the largest gas plant in the world, owned then by Thames Gas Board. The plant eventually closed in 1969 and the loco No. 1 transferred to the National Trust. No. 1 has quite a distinctive look because of the low headroom in some of the plant buildings, meaning that all the locomotives were limited to 8 feet in height, and you can see how low the cab and chimney are. Beckton Gasworks No. 1 is heading home, not to London, but to Glasgow, the city where it was manufactured, and where it will go on display at the Museum of Scottish Railways in Bowness. So why disassemble the collection? I'm going to read from the article in Steam Railway magazine and quote Richard Pennington, Senior Collections House Manager at Penrhyn Castle. We have been reviewing the way that we display our collection as we look at how history is presented at Penrhyn Castle, and as part of this process was to look at the locomotive collection in terms of its relevance to Penrhyn Castle's industrial heritage story. In order to bring this pivotal part of Penrhyn's story to the forefront, we have rehomed and returned some of the locomotives that are unconnected with the property's story to museums where stories can be better explained and interpreted. We are looking to the locomotives to be given new opportunities, some of which will be going back into operation, and others will provide new and engaging experiences for visitors. And so finally, to my personal opinion, Penrhyn Castle has always been synonymous with a railway museum to me, and with most of the collection being housed in the stable lot for around about the third of the life of the current castle building, I find it really hard to accept these locos are not being considered as part of the castle's industrial heritage. I'm sure the new display from the collection of artefacts that are not normally seen will be very, very interesting, but as a rail enthusiast, you just cannot beat a railway museum, well, apart from if they were in steam. By the time you see this video, many of the locos will have left for their new home, and this eclectic collection of locos will never be seen side by side together again, which I do find sad. That said, it's an exciting new chapter, and I agree the relocation offers real opportunities for the locos to tell further stories and for some to breathe back to life again. And I guess finally, time will tell if it's a case for the castle's team that they didn't know what they had until it was gone. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up, and do let me know what you think about the Penrhyn Museum. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts and comments, and also do let me know about the video format. I've tried something new here. I don't know whether it's worked, but if you can let me know whether you like the format. It's taken an awful long time to edit and to record, so hopefully it was worth it. Anyway, the other thing to say is, please, if you're new to the channel, check out the other videos on there. There's all kinds of subjects. It's basically anything that interests me, everything from radio control cars. I do like roller coasters, and I do like railways, and there's been lots of days out on there and lots of different projects, and there may be something there to interest you. And if you can subscribe, you'll be helping me out, you'll be helping the channel out. I'll be really, really grateful. With that all said, I think we'll leave this one there. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.